I think we'll say good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and Rebecca will start this webinar. Welcome.
Thanks, Angelica. So welcome to everybody for joining us. It's a great pleasure for me, Rebecca, from the World Food Programme, to introduce our very distinguished panel. So thank you for coming to speak with us today. Our objective of the panel, in collaboration with IOM, is to look at the perspectives and range of experiences involved in strengthening and defining peace in the humanitarian development peace nexus. And today we actually have a particular focus on Somalia because we want to make sure that we ground our experiences. So first, let me introduce you to Minister Ainte. Abdi Ainte is the former Minister of Planning and International Cooperation of Somalia. Minister Ainte brings a knowledge and experience of implementing humanitarian development peace nexus in a conflict setting, but from a government perspective. He has had first-hand knowledge and experience of doing this work in terms of Somalia's national development plans. It's also a great pleasure for me to introduce former Minister of Women and Human Rights Development, Deka Yassin. Minister Yassin, also with the federal government of Somalia, has more than 20 years of extensive experience in the promotion of youth and women's empowerment, human rights, peace building, conflict resolution, and crisis management through government, civil society, and the international fora. Welcome, Minister Yassin. It's also a great pleasure for me to introduce Mohammed Abdika as the Regional Director for the Eastern Horn of Africa for IOM. And Mohammed Abdika has been a great friend of WFP for many years. He has over 20 years of experience of working on the full range of migration issues in crisis and post-crisis settings. And finally, of course, my own Assistant Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Valerie Guarnieri. Valerie has been our AD since January 2018. In this role, she leads cutting-edge program and policy development towards ending hunger and spearheads WFP's efforts to ensure protection and inclusion, expansion of school meals and nutrition programs, the empowerment of women, and the building of resilient food systems. Thank you to our panel. And finally, let me introduce Angelica, my good friend and co-host from IOM. And let's kick off with a video, actually, that takes us straight into Somalia so that we can see the strong work that is being done in terms of conflict resolution and community-driven peacemaking. Thank you.
marka annagoo awal baahayn maamul goboleed awal iska tabardaran oo kala soo dishay isla markiiba waxaana dhax galay mataqaanaa cudurkan marka ka wuxuu keenay mataqaanaa hawlihii ku socdaan hakin guud inuu ku sameeyo xagga amnigiisii mataqaanaa xagga caafimaadkii xagga dhaqaalihii
وذنتها وانكو دور وين بكليين waxay kaga qayb qaataan markii hadda dhibaato jirto wacyigelinada inta ay bixiyaan bulshada oo si nabad loo raadiyo oo waxa weeye dagaal iyo dhibaato waxyaalaha jeermiska iyo qashinka iyo waxyaalaha soo dhan uu ka kaco baa naloo sheegay inaan dadku isku dhawaan qofkii hadda laga dareemo dadka ka fogaado baa naloo sheegay
So thank you very much for setting the scene. We're going to ask some different questions to the panel, and I see that Valerie joined us now. That's welcome. The first question we're going to discuss here is, in protected crisis settings, working to reduce humanitarian needs while laying the foundation for sustainable development and promoting peace is a very complex and ambitious endeavor. We would like to know from your perspective, what are one or two main challenges in this regard, building from the experiences in Somalia? And I would like to ask Ms. Guarani to start from World Food Programme, if that's okay with you. Yes?
Sure, thank you, and thank you so much for hosting this. Apologies, I'm in Cape Town today, and I've been having a little bit of technical challenges, but I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Great. So, I think we recognize, I think all of us really, that working to address humanitarian need while simultaneously addressing the underlying causes and root causes of that need, building resilience among communities who are faced with recurring shocks, and promoting peace is intellectually the right thing to do. And when you're taking a people perspective, it's also an essential thing to do, because for populations who are affected by these crises, they don't put them in neat little, bureaucratic boxes of chronic and acute and, humanitarian and development. So it's the right thing to do. But I think, as we've highlighted, it can be very, very challenging. And a few of the reasons that I would highlight as to why it's so challenging, I'll go with 3 P's right now, and that's perception, principles, and partnerships. And I just wanted to highlight briefly on each of them. I mean, first, in terms of perception, I know at the World Food Programme, we have a mandate that is broad enough for us to be simultaneously engaging in humanitarian and development work, with a focus on meeting emergency needs and promoting food security, which requires that broad focus. But we're mostly known for our emergency work, and most of the financing that comes into the organization to support that emergency and humanitarian work. So we find ourselves often in a situation where our engagement with people highlights the need to be working at a more addressing some of these underlying issues, but with financing that is very much directed towards only activities that neatly fit into an emergency or humanitarian scheme. Similarly, with the Nobel Peace Prize Award last year, it very much highlighted that important link between food and conflict, and the hunger and conflict, and the need to break that chain. So that gives a huge opportunity to be engaging further on the peace side. But there too, we need to sort of, push against some of the boundaries of perception of what a humanitarian actor, a food security actor's role is, working in partnership to promote peace. So these issues are key challenges. On the principle side, I think we have to acknowledge that there are, when you're looking at humanitarian, at development, at peace, we've got humanitarian principles that are in play. We've got, in development, principles of sustainability and investment that are in play. And when we're looking at peace, we're looking fundamentally at political issues. And so finding the right balance between addressing these issues and who's doing what can be a bit challenging in certain contexts. And then in terms of partnerships, it really does require looking at different range of actors and partners coming together in order to be simultaneously addressing humanitarian needs, development needs, and peace needs, and achieving outcomes and results in a manner that's complementary, even if not all actors are doing all things. So I think, I would highlight these as 3 challenges. In Somalia, and I think we'll be hearing more from other parties, I think we've had the opportunity to take some of these issues a little bit further. We've had some space to work within. On the WFP side, supporting the government social protection and safety net agenda and implementing a project funded by the World Bank has given a really good opportunity to be simultaneously working across humanitarian development and delivering a peace dividend for the population. And I think these are some of the kinds of examples we can use to break down some of these barriers that present challenges.
Thank you very much. I think the 3 Ps is very important to remember. And I'll move on quickly due to time to Mr. Mohammed Abdika to respond to the same question, if possible. Mr. Abdika. We might have lost him for some. Oh, there is Mr. Abdika. Please go ahead. It's always difficult to have these virtual meetings, no? But it's still wonderful that even through this pandemic, when we realize how interconnected we are, we have the possibility to meet via internet. So please, Mr. Abdika.
I'm really sorry. It looks like my connection is dropping all the time. So if it does that, please let me know. But it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel, particularly because it seems like all of them are my good friends. Valerie, that we met first in Zimbabwe and also in Nairobi, my sister, Minister Deka, and my brother, Minister Ainte, all of them good friends that we work with. So it's the first time I have a panel of people that I know. IOM has been operational in Somalia for a long time, working primarily with displaced populations across the humanitarian development and peace nexus. As a triple mandated organization and adhering to the OECD DAC recommendations on the HDPN, reducing humanitarian need while laying the foundations for sustainable development and promoting peace is almost at the core of how we operate in protracted crisis situations. In Somalia, it is clear that one of the main drivers of displacement and humanitarian suffering is insecurity. Addressing this challenge of promoting peaceful coexistence and security, therefore has to be at the forefront of and integrated onto everything we do. Closely linked to this is addressing fragility, the increasingly devastating impact of natural disasters, for example, and managing the unpredictability of the context in which we operate. In Somalia, like many other affected situations, this is about promoting social cohesion, generating shared goals or visions amongst community members, and rebuilding trust and legitimacy of the government institutions. In order to be successful, we as stakeholders need to have a deep and nuanced understanding of the context first, and also deliver as one, complementing each other's efforts. To provide more comprehensive solutions to as many vulnerable individuals and households as possible. I'll give you a few examples. For example, in Lower Shabelle, several important key towns and villages have been recovered from Al-Shabaab in recent years. This involves military planning and operations, the identification of respected local leaders to assume administrative positions when areas are recovered, and a coordinated planning between humanitarian providers and community stabilization actors becomes core of how we're going to work. There needs to be a legitimate local administration present, one that is accepted by the community. Aid and stabilization support needs to be lined up and ready to be delivered, and security forces must be properly equipped and supported to recover a town from an extremist group like that. However, if those security forces are perceived to be ill-intentioned, if they do not enjoy acceptance from the local community because of their clan affiliation, then there is a good chance that they will be rejected and perceived as occupiers, even though they represent the government and are tasked with recovering an area so locals can return and resume their lives and livelihoods. If there's no trust, there will be no open acceptance from the population. So building trust is a key component for recovery in Somalia. Despite this, despite the need for presence of security forces, it is important to ensure that we are seen as separate actors with different objectives from those of the military, and that we are not perceived as working hand in hand. Neutrality is not just a fact, but also a matter of perception. As IOM, we therefore provide holistic support across the humanitarian development peace nexus to communities in a way that reinforces the government legitimacy. And I'll repeat this, reinforcing government legitimacy, and enables the government to deliver services in order to strengthen communities and resilience, and to build trust in the local leadership while adhering to humanitarian principles. In order to improve our understanding and tailor our program to the context, we've designed a community stabilization index, and we have piloted this in Lower Shabelle. Using household surveys, we measure public perception with regard to security, access to social services, local administration, and how they are performing their work, the rule of law, and other indicators. And we continue to refine this tool, but it is already proven very informative in helping us better understand why some areas are more stable or unstable than others, in order to improve operational support accordingly and to enhance peace building itself in the country. Working more as one UN with our sister agencies, we've also strived to improve our delivery to the people, especially the most vulnerable populations like the IDPs, the internally displaced persons. We also work on building synergies between in-country humanitarian development peace actors, including participatory approaches with the target population itself, and strong coordination mechanisms, identifying a division of responsibilities between key actors for joint up as well as complementary planning and programming to enhance peace in Somalia. And I think we as international community need to be seen to be there to support the structures, support the government, to be seen to be the ones providing the assistance, not to be seen that we come there to take over some of the responsibilities that the government is supposed to be providing. I think I'll stop here. There's much more to say about this topic, and I look forward to the other questions to be able to continue with this. Over to you, moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abdika. I think peace seems to be the word: perception, participation, building peace. It's a lot of the things we need to do to accompany the efforts. So now it would be my great honor to start with Ms. Yassin, if possible, for her to give her perspective on how we can improve the humanitarian development peace nexus in Somalia.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm really very pleased to join this important discussion on working across the humanitarian development peace nexus. For the future of Somalia, is it certainly a critical challenge to both to reduce humanitarian needs and lay the foundation for sustainable development and peace. However, doing so, it is a complex as it is important. In my experience, a main barrier in this regards are the institutional silos, the separate machines that we have created to address humanitarian development and peace concerns. This is true for both development partners and the government as well. These separate machines operate based on distinct logics, incentives, budgets, timelines, and so on. Real progress will not be possible, in my opinion, without continued serious effort to change this institutional architecture and ensure it matches the integrated realities faced by people on the ground. In addition, we have to step up efforts to empower affected people to articulate their needs and participate in the identification of priorities across the nexus. This has to, of course, include women and girls who face distinct challenges and have particular contribution to make in ending resilience. They also make the majority of the displaced people, increased effort to empower affected women and men to articulate their own priorities, in my opinion, have to be the starting point for the shared understanding of key outcomes that we can all jointly work towards. I believe they are the experts on their concerns and priorities. For men and women on the ground, there is no divide between the challenges they face every day. There's no humanitarian, there's no peace, there's no development. It's all together. Their challenges does not occur in silos. So therefore we need to pay attention on that. For all these reasons, it's my humble opinion that better, more cohesive solutions have to start from the perspective of affected women and girls, men and boys. So I think I will stop there. I know we have time constraints, so I'll come back to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's also continuing on the peace, people in the center, and the participation of women and girls, I think is highly important. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Anti, please.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. It's a real pleasure to join you this morning or afternoon, wherever you are, for this very important and substantive dialogue on a subject that is very close to my heart, which is development and humanitarian nexus. Just to frame my intervention, my job in Somalia as a Minister of Planning was to articulate national development priorities for a country that is deeply divided, that deeply disagrees on most things, and that is comprised of communities, federal member states, and so on and so forth. So straight into the challenges, I would identify two main challenges. One was to really bring about domestic consensus on what development priorities should be for the entire nation. And keep in mind that the nation itself is very unequal. You've got 5 federal member states and 2 other entities, the capital and Somaliland, that are part of the country and have different circumstances, and there's different development priorities within the country. So my job was to try and really bring everyone on board into a broadly acceptable national vision, one that has not been around for 30 years. This was the first time we were putting together a document called a National Development Plan for Somalia, and this is the years 2015 and 2016. And that really took a lot of, I think, legwork and an incredible amount of negotiations and dialogue with domestic stakeholders to try to really bring everyone on board, because there are different peace dividends, peace realities on the ground, but also different development priorities across the nation. So that was one key challenge, one we overcame with really spending a lot of political capital, but also enormous amount of resources engaging the various stakeholders across the country to make sure that everyone really feels heard and included, and that perspectives are respected and brought together. Also keeping in mind that the National Development Plan cannot be, you know, a shopping list for the priorities of communities or member states or the private sector or civil society. It really truly has to reflect the national aspirations of the country. So that was, I would say, a primary challenge we confronted and overcome you know, throughout the period of drafting the National Development Plan. I think the second one is one my colleague and sister, Minister Decker, just touched upon, which was really to also you know, win or bring about a similar consensus or align, you know, national priorities with development assistance. There is an abundance of availability of development assistance, but as Brother Muhammad Abdikair just said, it wasn't always acting as one, even within the UN family. And so my job was to try and really bring together everyone under one roof and say that our country has now articulated these national development priorities. And your job as development partners is to align yourselves with these priorities. And there are certain indexes and matrices and benchmarks we can all agree on the implementation, but projects and programs have to be aligned with our national priorities. It was, I must say, an equally cumbersome process because one would discover in a protracted protracted conflict environment like Somalia, that even development partners and international organizations and UN organizations don't always see eye to eye on key things. And there is I must say, a very unhealthy degree of competition many times among either the UN agencies or international NGOs. I'm being here a little too frank maybe, but as a former UN staff myself, I can, I think, say that with a great deal of confidence that what we have seen was very unhealthy in our context. And that really sometimes undermined the efforts of the government to try to bring everyone on board and to break what Mr. Decker just said, the silos and the parallelities that exist. So those were the two, I would say, the fundamental challenges. Now, there was a third element which wasn't directly related to my docket, but it was tangentially related, and I had to deal with it quite constantly. And that is really to try to refocus the national agenda away from emergencies. Of course, we have persistent emergencies in Somalia, humanitarian emergencies, mainly related to environmental degradation, floods, famine, and so on and so forth. Many of those are quite frequent across the year, and we have seasons for this for these things. But while we try to address those, one of the other challenges I confronted quite a bit was try to really also create an attitude where we need to get to the root cause of those emergencies and not only focus on today's emergencies as a response mechanism, but really to invest in long-term planning and addressing some of the fundamental structural and infrastructure challenges we have in our country. So I'd stop here and look forward to further reflections later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also want to remind all participants, you are welcome to write questions in the chat, and we will respond to them at the end of the panel debate. And now over to my great friend, Rebecca Richards, the Chief of the Conflict and Peace Program in World Food Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. So we've started our panel with really understanding the challenges, and I think we can see some themes resonating throughout. It was quite interesting from Minister Enti to be concluding around the importance of focusing on root causes and longer term, but also the challenge of balancing national aspirations with development objectives. But that similarly, Regional Director Abdika was saying that social cohesion, shared goals and building that, and also the challenge of being able to work very much at a local level in some of the contexts also touches on this issue of perception that Valerie was also covering in terms of her 3 Ps and the importance of balancing principles, but also where that leads to in terms of partnerships. It was very good to hear Minister Decker say how important it is to also maybe add participation, and participation as maybe the 4th P in terms of having a more people-centered approach and their voice in our planning. So as we've covered the challenges, let me perhaps go to the next question, which is really about solutions. What could we do looking forward when it comes to potential opportunities for engaging in, whether it's people, processes, or systems? What could we be doing? What could our solutions be? So perhaps I can start with my AED, Valerie.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I loved listening to all of the different speakers and some of the points on, the importance of these partnerships, of these breaking down these institutional silos, starting from the perspective of people. I mean, I think and how do we come together in our efforts to really be supporting the national plan and the national aspirations is really so key. And I think there's real opportunities for us on this, and real opportunities to be working together and working better together, bringing in both the usual suspects. So, if I look at it, some of the actors we already work closely with on the ground, but also, new players. I think for humanitarian actors, the kind of engagement that is essential with government, if we're even, hoping to be working along the humanitarian development peace nexus, can be quite different than how humanitarian action takes place in other contexts. And then also the work with the private sector just becomes key. We know that the private sector is absolutely essential really for any of the SDGs to be taking hold, and certainly to be really embracing the humanitarian development peace nexus. And here I think sometimes we speak as if we're talking about the global private sector, and of course there's a role there, but it's the local private sector that is, going to have to be really part and parcel of these efforts. So, I think if we look at the range of actors that need to come together and work together to be identifying some collective outcomes, knowing that in a sort of Venn diagram way, there are things we're going to be looking to do as separate parts of this ecosystem that don't connect, but where is the point that we're connecting on? Build our collective outcomes around that, and then work diligently towards identifying, who brings what strengths and capacities in order to achieve them. So that's one. The second is that we do need, and you're really looking at this piece point in the nexus triangle, we need to be very intentional in our efforts to be building peace, starting with do no harm, but going further and looking at promoting peace. And conflict sensitivity is key. A very solid analysis of the drivers of food insecurity, of the drivers of conflict, of the barriers to progress and development is key, and working that into a shared understanding. So this requires some level of, data sharing, but also real conversation about this analysis and building up from there. And then the last point, I think, is that we have a real opportunity, and if we're going to break down the silos, we need to, be systematic about what outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then we need to measure progress. We need that evidence that shows that by working in a different way, by breaking down those silos, by coming together around collective outcomes, by engaging with different partners, we actually can achieve more, and use that to really break down those silos and get that financing and that engagement in play for other contexts as well.
That's wonderful, Valerie. Thank you. 3 powerful messages. Let me move on perhaps to Mr. Abdika, if you wouldn't mind. IOM, please. Solutions and opportunities.
Thank you very much. I think earlier I drew attention to the risks and the lack of trust in my previous response. Taking a humanitarian development peace nexus approach in Somalia can work, and I think it has worked in some instances. It requires a nuanced understanding of the context and a focus on building trust, social cohesion, as mentioned earlier, shared goals, and government legitimacy. As I said earlier, that's really important. For this to work, the process is as, if not more important than the services that we are providing. It requires coordination with the security, with the political, with the local leaders, including with women and youth. We have been at the forefront as IOM, working, for example, in Lower Shabelle, supported the pre-recovery dialogues between community members and local, state, and federal government authorities. The capital of Lower Shabelle, for example, in Makkah, was under the control of Al-Shabaab for many years and was arguably one of the group's main hubs. And in 2018, we brought together multiple levels of Somali government, respected clan elders, and other influential local community members, as well as the African Union and local security providers. Our main issue as IOM was that these key partners pursued a concerted effort to ensure a coordinated plan was developed. Most importantly, that this plan was founded on the interest and the goodwill of the communities on the ground, who are ready to reject the insurgent group and wanted an inclusive, balanced, and representative local administration. The people in the communities want peace, livelihood, and stability. That's the key issue they always say all the time. We want our peace, we want our livelihood, we want our stability. We were involved in designing and supporting some of the first government community dialogues to brainstorm what success in Marca, for example, would look like, both before and after Marca became accessible. We worked with the new district administration in Lower Shabelle, the governor, and the Marca communities in delivering a holistic package of support that pursued two goals. One is how to respond to the community's priorities, such as installing solar street lights to respond to basic town safety and security needs, and construction of a new school that brings together students from historically conflicting clan groups. Number two, and to do so in such a way that bolsters the legitimacy and the capacity of the Marca administration so that the residents see that their government is providing services, not the aid or not the international aid community that is providing that assistance. As a result, what we've seen, the Marca administration is also better able to respond to emerging crises, like when conflicts in outlying areas caused thousands to flee to Marca in 2020. And now, because Marca is seen as more stable, with a viable local administration, with whom to partner with longer-term development partners themselves are beginning to consider how their programs can further gain these successes we've had in Marca. Economic development programs are investing in fisheries and renewable energy, while another program focusing on access to justice is supporting judicial capacity building in Lower Shabelle. Key lessons that will apply to any context, but especially a chronic protracted crisis context, are first, know your context. If you don't know your context, you can't implement anything on the ground that's going to be positive. Based on this, another lesson is to support an inclusive process that generates shared goals and use tailored and incremental transitional programming to address conflict drivers and create conditions that are more suitable for longer-term development efforts. In IOM, we've started these dialogues, then activities that brought government and community together to agree on priorities. Then we piloted an initial infrastructure project. Finally, it's important to provide support in such a way that capacitates the government, not replacing the government. Somalia needs state building to end the chronic humanitarian crisis. Another great humanitarian development peace nexus example shown on the video earlier is the so-called MID-NIMO program, which IOM implements together with the UNDP and UN Habitat. It aims to build resilient communities, moving from an aid agency-driven modality to one where the government and the community co-design and lead nationally aligned and owned programs. In this new way of working, we need to accompany local processes, strengthen social cohesion, urban resilience, livelihoods and employment, including women empowerment. I think I'll stop here for now. I think our time is running out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abdika. That was brilliant. And again, we see so many complementarities with Valerie's opening, but continuing that theme of social cohesion, the importance of nuanced understanding. Thank you. Let me hand over now to Minister Decker, please. Your solutions, your opportunities.
Thank you. I reflected, and I think in the short time, I picked the one that I think it's important. To me, a potential opportunity to make progress on the HDP nexus in Somalia, and I think in elsewhere, is the Women, Peace and Security agenda. As you know, the UN Security Council's Resolution 1325 and the follow-up resolutions set out a range of priorities for the promotion of women's rights in conflict and emergency situation. Many countries have drawn up action plans for the implementation of the UN 1325 and the follow-up. These action plans assign responsibilities to humanitarian, development, and peace actors, and are a useful tool, I believe, to coordinate and integrate their activities. During my time as a minister, we launched an inclusive and a bottom-up process for the implementation of UN 1325 in Somalia, based on a homegrown product, which was the Somali Women's Convention. We use an opportunity to bring together more than 350 women and gender champions across Somalia and federal member states, as well as the diaspora, and as well gender champions, because we believe that, again, we can work on silos. And this convention really gave us an opportunity to share our demands and articulate these shared demands for the rights in Somalia's transition and development processes. Participants included women leaders, the gender champions working in government, civil society, and the private sector, both at national level, as I indicated, at the federal member states, and within the diaspora. Special efforts were made to ensure that representation of marginalized groups, including internally displaced people, were heard and were present during this convention. At the end of the convention, the participants came up with a joint demands in the Somali Women's Charter, and their demands were across humanitarian, development, and peace sectors. So this was the nexus as we speak. So therefore, through this consultative process that was coordinated by the ministry and my leadership, all federal member states, as a follow-up, and the Banadi Regional Administration, they came up with their own priorities and their own action plan. And on this basis, the ministry initiated an inclusive process to develop a national action plan for the implementation of the Somali Women's Charter, which is a homegrown product, and the 1325. So they were not, they were basically together. It was, but this charter was a homegrown product that we believed it would stick more. This plan was designed to coordinate the whole government, the development, humanitarian, and peace actors across this shared agenda. Therefore, these efforts provide, in my opinion, an opportunity for more integrated work across the nexus, integrated work that is truly grounded in the single realities experienced by affected women and girls. Thank you.
Minister Decker, that's so important, the voice of women and girls in actually integrating across humanitarian development, peace, but also being able to feed through all processes and systems so that we make real change. Thank you so much. So our final speaker then, please, if I could ask Abdi Inte to share his thoughts on solutions.
Thank you. Just picking up where my sister Decca left, I would say two potential solutions from my side. One is really to recognize that articulating national development priorities for conflict-affected countries, countries like Somalia, is an inherently political process. It is not an entirely humanitarian and development process. I think that needs to be very clear to all development partners, because oftentimes I think there is the wrong assumption that even you know, in countries where you are facing protracted conflict, that people you know, agree on on humanitarian and development priorities, and that's not always the case. So I think an inherent understanding is necessary here on the need to recognize that governments in fragile contexts are engaged in a political exercise to ensure that development priorities truly reflect the aspirations of the stakeholders across the country, both political stakeholders, but you've mentioned private sector, for example, very, very important stakeholder in a context like Somalia. One of the most vibrant private sectors across the continent, but also civil society, and so on and so forth. I think that would then, what you would then ultimately get is an inclusive, reflection, an inclusive description of what national priorities would be. So that's a first sort of articulation, the first potential solution. And I say this because throughout the exercise of the National Development Plan in 2015 and 16, we've worked with a lot of our partners, UNDP and others. I think the assumption was that people across the country would just simply endorse whatever the government thinks, government in the capital thinks are the national priorities. But that wasn't the case. I think we were all in for a rude awakening in that sense. The second potential solution could be is for the partners themselves. And that's really the importance of fidelity to sticking to the national priorities of the country and implementing it. And as my brother Mohammed Abdikhair really articulated very well, empowering the government at the end of the day. And you can empower the government by essentially implementing or helping the government implement their own national priorities and coordinating it with the government very closely, and also coordinating with your other colleagues. I think the UN is getting slightly better in this sense, but other international NGOs and other actors still need to coordinate better. I mean, there are now living examples in our country where you have multiple education programs that are all very effective and helpful, but that are duplicitous in nature or sometimes conflicting and so on and so forth. So I think that silos need to be broken. Coordination and partnership is very important with the government, and empowering the government really is fundamental to all of this, because that's how you engender legitimacy to the government in the eyes of the public. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So important to ensure that the views of all stakeholders are reflected in national priorities, fidelity to national priorities, and we see common themes emerging also on our solutions. We have about 10 minutes left, and I know there are a number of questions coming in on the chat, so I don't want to take up more time, only that I know that our audience really want to have a chance to interact with our panel. So maybe Angelica, I could ask you to fire off with our first question.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I mean, the first question comes from Ali Spring, and it's quite interesting because it's about infrastructure and technology. And because this event is all techno, provided by IT, I think his question is very relevant. Do you see that the technology will facilitate or limit factors in your work to converge the silos of the HDP and nexus in Somalia? So any words about, should we start with Ms. Guarani, if around technology, is going to help us or not help us in promoting peace in Somalia?
I certainly see technology as a very, as a helpful enabler to progress on development in Somalia. But even discussions around technology, and particularly when we're looking at infrastructure, I would suggest need to be considered from the perspective of a kind of conflict sensitivity type of analysis, and a, needs of the people, aspirations of the people, and national development plan perspective are key. So I think in that sense, if we would be, we bring that lens into the process, and then absolutely technology becomes an enabler. I also would highlight that, Somalia it's a great sort of, laboratory as well of how we can have the opportunity, building on what's there, to leapfrog over other developments. And I think the vibrancy of the local private sector, the engagement of civil society, I think bringing those strengths to the table become absolutely a key, and seeing how technology, and here really looking at digital technology and not necessarily like roads and bridges, has the opportunity to really unleash that power and that opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. And quickly over to Mr. Abdika, if you would want to comment around that.
I'll agree very much with what Valerie has said, but Somalia also is one country where the private sector has taken such a strong interest in infrastructure and telecommunications and communication itself. So if you go to Mogadishu, you get it even a better internet price than in Nairobi. If you go and look at how much they've gone into the private sector. So if you ask me, is telecommunications helping the HDPN? Obviously it does. I think Somalia is one country where I have more Twitter followers than any other country. So communication, people following each other and trying to make it information goes out as quickly as possible, helps not just on the peace side, helps on the development side, but most importantly, if you do not have communication, if you don't have the infrastructure in the villages, then you become cut out from the whole development space. How would you call your representative? How would you call your government and say, this is happening in my region? So I think fully agree with Valerie, but also agree that that is an important component that helps in the humanitarian development peace nexus. Over.
Thank you very much. Quickly over to Ms. Deka Yassin, if that's okay with you.
Yes, I think you can hear me, right?
Yeah. Yes.
As my brother Mohammed Abdikhair said, I think I link to that. Knowing the context is critical, and a good joint or shared analysis has to be a starting point on work across the nexus. And given the context example regarding security, and even more so in the pandemic, analysis and data collection can be really a challenge in Somalia. So technology can help overcome these challenges. An example that I can share is during my work as a minister, we did a survey of 10,300 women across the country, and we use the mobile phone technology. And in that sense, I think technology can enable a good analysis and the kind of participatory approach that we spoke about it. So I think technology, yes, can be very, very useful.
Great. And poor Mr. Yanti, everyone has really said most, but I'm leaving you some words as well before I hand over to Rebecca. So go ahead.
No, thank you. Really nothing much to add. I think Somalia is really a prime example where technology is a great enabler. We see this in the cash transfers program that you are all running, where people can easily receive their money through the mobile phone. But I do want to link this to the private sector, and I see there is a question someone raised about that and how we can partner with the private sector. You know, in a context like Somalia, where 95% of the economy is controlled by the private sector and the government only controls less than 5%, I think it's very important that you really bring the private sector as an essential partner to developing humanitarian and development priorities. And that's precisely what we've done through our time. You know, my message was always to them, look, the implementation of this national development plan is going to be your business more than it is the business of the government at the end of the day, because you really have the capacity and the tools. The government does not have the capacity. The federal government of Somalia has what, about 6,000 civil servants in total, whereas Hormuz, the largest conglomerate of the country, has about 40,000 employees across the country. And so you can see really the difference there and the capacity to implement. So I think it's really critical that we bring the private sector, not only for implementation purposes, but also for peace dividend purposes. I mean, keep in mind that in fragile contexts, this private sector has and sometimes continues to be part of the conflict. Good news, in the case of Somalia, they're really not anymore. They are now trying their best to be part of peace and stability in the country, and they can be a force for good.
Thank you very much. Rebecca.
Thanks, Angelica. So we've got a great question in the chat that actually speaks a little bit to what was covered in the first session. This is from Melina Nathan. Picking up on Minister Decker's point regarding silos being an obstacle, and Minister Ainte's point about competition within the UN and international NGOs, could Mohammed and Valerie give us a sense of how interagency work, jointness, and accompanying government instead of replacing it could be reconciled with individual agency business models and the lack of resources where you do have competition for funding? So I'll ask this to our WFP and IOM speakers first, but perhaps also Mr. Decker and Avdinta can have a think too from their perspectives, what they'd like to share. But maybe if you wouldn't mind, I could start with Valerie.
Thanks, Rebecca, and it's a great question. And I think Somalia presents quite a few examples of how this is being done. And one example I touched on earlier, and that's the example that WFP has been doing in partnership with other organizations to really transition our long engagement on humanitarian assistance in a large-scale cash-based transfer program through the retail network into support for the government social protection and safety net agenda. And this has been benefiting from financing coming through the World Bank. So through this project, we're leveraging the humanitarian cash assistance and by supporting the government to design and implement a rural social safety net. And so the delivery processes benefit from infrastructure that we helped set up in the context of the humanitarian response, the scopes technology, but we use now that has been sort of transitioned into a national system and a national process of targeting and prioritization based on consultative processes. So by supporting the government in delivering services, then the face of the support becomes the government at the national and at the local level. And that is a key part. We found this also from other contexts that we've been studying together with CIPRI, that sort of that peace dividend and the connection of the services to the nation and not to actors who have come in from abroad, financed from abroad to provide this support is a key part of building that social contract and providing those social services.
Brilliant, thank you. Mohammed Abdikat.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really great question, which I'll be lying to you if I say we are solving that problem very quickly. We are not, but we are getting there. Not just through the Secretary General's prevention agenda, where we can talk to the government, talk to our partners, the restructuring or the reform of the UN system itself, trying to bring everyone under one roof to have these discussions. A lot is going on that. So we've not yet reached a point where we can say we're doing a great job, but I think we're getting there. But I've given you example earlier on the work we do on our Mid-NEMO program, working jointly with the government, UN Habitat, and UN and UNDP in trying to provide support to local individuals and groups and societies and the clans and everyone else in a group. It just shows you that already the UN agencies are coming together, and this question is becoming a key issue. If you look at our peace building programs, for example, and talk about peace building, we have what we call the Peace Building Fund, which again, you cannot come in as just IOM or WFP or UNDP and say, I want to have a peace building fund on this. Question is always asked, who are you partnering with? How many other UN agencies are part of that? And at the end of the day, it's not going to be just the UN agencies writing a proposal and giving to UN Peace Building Fund. The question is going to be asked, is the government on board? Do they agree this is an important contribution before the UN system is able to go out there and provide that kind of funding and assistance. So I agree, great question. I agree with what Valerie has said already. We haven't reached the optimum level where we can say we're doing a great job, but I think the train is moving to that direction now. Over, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abdika. Let me ask Minister Decker, please, just for your views quickly, and Abdi into them.
Yeah, I think linking to what Mohammed Abdelkhair has just said is that things are moving. We're not there yet, but it's a lot needs to be done. And I think that we need to be mindful of how support really builds the social contract. I think that is extremely important. So I think a lot needs to be done, but we're getting there, I believe. I want to be optimistic.
It is important to be optimistic. Mr. Emte.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we're getting there for sure. I think a key to really breaking down the silos and better coordination among development partners is to, is one of the 3 Ps of Valerie, which is partnership with the government. Let's start with that, and fidelity to partnership, really, and focusing on these priorities as basis of implementation instead of inventing your own. I mean, I know funding sources sometimes can be complicated for all of you, but I think you will always find a menu of options within the development plan to pick from and work with the government. I mean, I was always really struck by the number of opportunities that are out there for international partners and international, humanitarian development organizations to work on, but few were focused on certain areas that they thought was more maybe easier for them to do. I don't know why, but I think the menu of options is very much out there.
Brilliant, thank you. So really standing behind our national governments and priorities will naturally bring us closer together. It's 3 o'clock. I think none of us realized the time would go so fast. It's been rich and honest conversation. I think we'd all happily sit here and keep talking for another hour, but that would be unfair to our participants. Let me hand over to Angelica to close. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to thank all the people, the participants who are attending today, and also obviously the panelists for the time you put into this and the highlights you've done around the P, which I found interesting. The participation of people to prevent the persistent emergencies, investing in political capital and in partnership. And I think people cause the problems, but people, we can also solve the problems. So together we shall. And it's a great honor for me to also do this panel together with the World Food Programme, who were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2020. And to end, if you may stay for a few minutes, we want to show a little short movie that shows the link between conflict and hunger and the critical role of food assistance and other steps, how we can together work for peace. And thank you so much, everyone. And a big applause. If we were in the same room, we would applaud the panelists. And over to the movie. Thank you.
جعنا نكذب عليكم، جعنا ليش واحد يكذب يحكي الصراحة. هلا يعني شوي الحمد لله رب العالمين، يعني أشوى مو أكتر من قبل. صارت أزمة علينا وصار حصار، عدت علينا أزمة كتير صعبة، حتى رغيف الخبز نحن 3 أشخاص 5 أشخاص يعطونا 3 رغيفان خبز.
Caught in the conflict in Syria, Fatima and her family have had to rely on food assistance to survive. 8 out of 10 of the world's main food crises are partly driven by conflict and violence. The 2020 Nobel Peace Prize awarded to the United Nations World Food Programme is a recognition of the important link between conflict and hunger and the critical role that food assistance plays in supporting the first step towards peace and stability. By improving food security, we can prevent hunger and help build more stable communities. The World Food Programme has been working on the front lines of conflicts and changing lives for over 50 years. Today, 60% of the world's hungry live in countries affected by conflict.
If we can address food security in the most effective way, it will at least eliminate food security as a component for war and conflict. And I believe in today's environment, that's the most important, the most effective direction that we can take working together.
From supporting homegrown school meal programs to providing food to people in exchange for work on community assets like roads or dams, the World Food Programme uses food to promote stability, to help save lives during conflict, to help rebuild after conflict, and overall, to help build peace. Without peace, we cannot end world hunger.